Welcome to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 5, Importing and Exporting Active Directory Objects. You are at the advanced stage of Active Directory now, where you already know how to create users, groups, create policies, and so forth. Now it is time to learn how to get these objects, namely users and groups, from an external database into our Active Directory database. So in this video, you will learn how to export Active Directory objects using the csvde command. You will also learn how to use the ADSI editor to study what are known as the LDAP attributes of the Active Directory objects. And then finally, you will use a file that I have created and is included in your CD-ROM that shows you how to import user objects created in an external database into Active Directory. So in other words, if you already have a set of users created in a different application such as Excel, or in a different Active Directory application altogether such as Novell, well, what you can also do is export it from there and import those users and groups and other objects into Active Directory without actually having to retype those usernames and computer objects and so forth. So let's learn exactly how to do this. Let's first start by understanding what is CSVDE. So going on to the next screen over here, it stands for Comma Separated Variable Data Exchange. This is a built-in command in Windows 2000 as well as in Server 2003 as well as in Windows XP. So once again, you cannot perform activities that I'm going to show you in this lab on Windows 2000 Professional. You either got to have a server product, and this is built in into Windows XP as well. CSV, also known as comma separated value, is one of the oldest file formats in the exchange of database records. In other words, if you already have information stored into a database, what you can do is you can convert it into a common language known as a CSV, and then from there you can import it into Active Directory. This type of concepts is used all the time in databases as well as in real life. For example, if you're a pilot, no matter which country or which airline you fly, you have to know the English language, because English is the universal language that is spoken by all pilots, so that the communication tower can communicate with you exactly as to what to do next. Okay, so this is a common language in a similar format, in a similar way. The CSV is a common format that is used to import and export information out of databases. Let me show you an example of exactly what a CSV file looks like. So to do that, what I've done is I've prepared an Excel spreadsheet over here, and what I did was I just created two rows over here. The first row is the column headings, first name, last name, address one, and so forth, and I've entered a record which is basically my name and my information over here on the second row. So in other words, this is the column header, which will basically be tracking names and addresses of people that I know, and I've started with my name over here. So my first name is Obaid, last name Chatriwala, my address, city, state, zip, and so forth. Now this is done in Excel spreadsheet, which is also used to create comma separated values, but it could have been done even in a notepad file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say file, save as, and rather than just save it as a regular Excel file, what I've done is selected the format known as CSV or comma delimited, and I'm going to explain to you what this means. And what I'm going to do is save this on the root of my C drive over here. So on the C drive, I'm going to save this file called let's call it test. So it will have the extension test.csv. I'm going to click on the save button over here, and it's letting me know that since you're converting into a format that is not the XLS format, you're going to lose some features, which is fine. I don't need the features that Excel gives me in this particular file in any case. I just need it to be a generic text file. Now I'm going to say yes over here and minimize this screens, and then go and take you to the root of my computer over here and look at this file called test that we just created. Since I created it in Excel and Excel has been installed over here, Microsoft Windows XP is smart enough to know that, you know what, you can open this file easily with Excel, but actually it's a text file. So what I'm going to do is right click on this and say open with, and then I'm going to open it with Notepad just to show you what a generic file looks like. So here we go. Here's the file that was created. Look what it did. It took the first row, and then the very first column header was first name, it put a comma, last name, put a comma, and so forth. In other words, these are my column headings, first name, last name, address 1, address 2, city, state, and zip. It put a comma against each one of those, and this becomes the header row. Alright, so this is an imported row in a comma separated value. It basically is what is known as the header row. We just get this highlight clear over here. Alrighty, now all the other rows are records. So in this case, I have one header row and I have just one record. If I had 10 records over here, I would see a total of 11 lines. 10 records, one line for each record, and then the first row would be the header row. Now, the way this is communicating with us is that the first name is Obaid, last name is Chhatriwala, and it is separating the first name and the last name by means of a comma. So comma is what is known as a delimiter. It is separating one piece of information from another. All databases can read this format. So you can import a file that is created in what is known as CSV, or comma separated value, into another database, and what it will do is that it will interpret it as such that, okay, here's the first column, here's the second column, third column, fourth column, fifth column, sixth column, and the seventh column, and then these are all the records that tie to each column. So it will automatically put Obaid under first name, Chhatriwala under last name, and so forth. So can you imagine if you have already a bunch of records, let's say 1,000 records of users and groups and so forth, into a different kind of an application, which is a database, and you can convert from there. In other words, you're going to export from that database into a CSV value. Once you've done that, it is possible, once again, it's not entirely as simple, but it is possible to actually take those records and import it into our Active Directory, thereby saving me time from entering those records all over again using Active Directory users and computers. So this is a great way of actually importing and exporting information out of our databases. And we're going to do several examples of this. So what I'm going to do is close this, and let's look further into this command known as the CSVDE command. This command works in two different modes, the export mode and the import mode. Export mode basically means it will export information out of Active Directory into a comma separated value file, and import mode basically means that if you have a CSV file, it can be imported into the Active Directory. By default, the mode is export. What I'm going to do is run several examples of this command to give you an idea as to exactly how to use this command in a useful manner. So the very first line that we're going to run is, I'm going to make a connection to DC1, and on the command prompt, we'll type this command, CSVDE, that is the command itself, comma separated value data exchange, minus F. The minus F switch stands for the file name. And then what we're saying is that export all the objects in Active Directory into a file known as adinfo.csv, which is the extension of the comma separated value. So let's try that. So what I'm going to do is minimize the screen and then go to domain controller 1, DC1. Over here we will go to the command prompt. Remember, you do not have to install any additional tools. This CSVDE command is already built into the command line of Server 2000. So I'm going to go to the command and then just reposition my screen a little bit over here so I have a clean screen. Okay, there we go. Let's start. So the first command that I'm going to type is the command itself, CSVDE minus F. That means the name of the file, and then the file will be called adinfo.csv. Okay, so it's going to it's going to export the entire Active Directory into this file called adinfo. This file will be saved in the C drive simply because I'm typing this from the command prompt of the C itself, from the root of the C itself. Okay, you can save it to somewhere else if you'd like to do that. Just give it a full path name over here. So for example, if I would like to save this into a folder called test, I will put it as c:/test/adinfo.csv. So in our case, for convenience, I'm going to save everything to the root of our directory. I'm going to hit enter over here. It has started exporting the records, and as you can see over here, it exported 140 records. Let's have a look at what our Active Directory looks like in a comma separated value file. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the C drive of our server, and here's the file that was created. I'm sorry, this one, adinfo.csv. I'm going to right click on this file and then say open with, and try to open this file with Notepad. Okay, so I'm going to select Notepad over here and open it up. Lot of information, not easy to read. Look at this. And again, there is a lot more on the right hand side that is not visible out here. I'm just trying to take the cursor as far to the right as I can, just to show you that this is a huge, humongous file, even though we really didn't have too many users or groups created in our Active Directory. But you can see how big this file is. Okay, and in this format is completely unreadable. So what we need to do is open this file in Excel. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to start Excel. So on DC1, I'm going to start Excel, and then let's close this introductory screen over here. We're going to open this file up. So I'm going to say open over here and navigate to the root of the C drive. And of course, I cannot see the name of the file simply because by default it is looking for only XLS or Excel files. So I'm going to click on a drop down box over here, and I'm going to say look for all files including text files, and there we go, this one showed up. Okay, now I'm going to double click on adinfo.txt, and here we go, the file opened up. Again, the format is not very clear, but at least it's legible, and I can use Excel editing tools to actually see exactly what's going on over here. So what I'm going to do is expand the first column over here, and just to show you the objects that are visible over here. There we go, DN standing for distinguished name, and the distinguished name and one of the objects in our Active Directory is our domain name itself. Okay, so perhaps one of the most important entries out there. So DC equals Ben and Brady, comma DC equals com, and I got lucky over here. Look at this. These are some of the objects that we created. Our very first one of the objects that we created was the North Carolina OU, and here's the distinguished name of that. OU equals North Carolina, comma DC equals Ben and Brady, comma DC equals com. Basically saying, telling us the location of this OU North Carolina under benbrady.com. In fact, in North Carolina, we had an OU called sales. Here we go. That's what that OU is. And in that OU, we had a user called R. Stevens, and there we go. That's the fully distinguished name of the user. If you recall, we used this command to actually restore this user in the previous video when I showed you the authoritative method of restoration. So here's the command that we used, because this is the command that the X500 language of Active Directory understands to find the actual user that you would like to manipulate. So that happens to be just one of the columns. Check this out. There are a bunch of columns over here. Let me just reposition the screen a little bit better so you can see more of what's out there. So this is just one of the columns, and I'm just going to navigate over here just to show you how many columns is there. This is basically all the information that is being held about objects in the Active Directory. For example, here's the lockout duration field, okay, and it's putting in the values in some format over here to say what is the lockout value and so forth. I'm going to go over here on the right hand side to find something that is of much more interest to us. Again, this will be the distinguished name spelled out for us. Object category. This is the type of object, whether it is a user or a group and so forth. For example, here, let's study these two because these are important. Object category is a definition of that object in the schema. So for example, the first row was the row for the domain itself, and that is defined in the schema as a domain. Whereas if you go over here, this was the row for the user Robert Stevens, and you can see the name right here. It is defined as the object class user. Let's take another example. North Carolina is an organizational unit and so forth. Okay, let me show you one more. Here, here's the group administrators, and there it is. It is defined as a group. So this is basically all the information from the Active Directory exported into a text file, and we are reading this for convenience into in an Excel spreadsheet. Again, here is the common name. So this is the common name. For example, our common name was Robert Stevens. Again, we used this concept when we were trying to restore this user into the Active Directory. So let me see if I can show you something else that's useful. SAM account name is the name for backward compatibility with Windows NT. Also note the way this is spelled, because when we start importing, we have to actually spell this out exactly in the same manner, and so forth. So I'm sure you get the information at this point that what I've done is exported the entire Active Directory into this file called adinfo.csv. Now, the file the way it is now, at this point, we can still do some searches on this because we have opened this up in Excel, which is a great manipulation tool of information. We can basically take this this data and then manipulate it any way we want. For example, we can hide certain columns if we don't need to. For example, I'm going to select these two columns, right click, and then over here say hide. So those columns are not visible to us. What I can do is sort this information in different ways and so forth. However, what I'm going to do next is the following. What I'm going to do is, let me close this Excel spreadsheet. Do I want to save any changes? No. What I'm going to do is run this command one more time in a different syntax, and this particular syntax will get me only certain selected records, not everything from the Active Directory. So let's see what the format for that is. So the very first format that we ran was with the switch -f, which basically said export everything into the file called adinfo.csv. The next command that I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to say csvd -f, which is export into a file adinfo1. So we'll create a new file. And now what I'm going to say is that use the switch -l. That means limit the following columns only. And these are the columns: distinguished name, object class, object category, and a common name. Distinguished name is the name of the object as defined in the Active Directory. It will basically give us the full address of that object in the Active Directory. Object class is the definition of that particular object, whether it is a user, group, and so forth. The object category is the schema itself, and then the common name is what we call the object. For example, Robert Stevens, or a group called administrators, and so forth. Okay, so let's run this command. What this command will do is limit the number of columns that are exported from the Active Directory into this file. So that's one way of limiting exactly what you want to see in the Active Directory. So I'm going to minimize this, and let's go back to the command prompt of DC1, and then over here we will type our next command, which is csvde -f, and the file that I'm going to use over here is adinfo1. So we create a separate file, give it the extension .csv, and then over here I'm going to put -l as a switch, and this will limit exactly what I need. So what I need is, you have to start this with a quotation, dn, which is a distinguished name, comma. The next thing that we're going to put is object class, comma, then object category, comma, and then cn for common name, and then close this with the parentheses. These must be spelled out exactly the way they appear in the Active Directory. So let me just double check the syntax. So we are saying create a new file called adinfo.csv. In this file, please export the records, but not everything, only the following columns, which is the distinguished name, the object class, the object category, and then a common name. I think the command looks good. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to hit the enter button over here, and there we go. It again exported 140 entries because it exported each and every record. It's just that it will not show us all the information about these records. So let's close, let's minimize the command prompt, and then go back to Excel. And I'm going to open up the second file that we just created now. So let's say file open here. Go to the root of the C drive, change this to text files, and we're going to open the second file, which is adinfo.csv. Here we go. The same number of rows, because I did not limit myself to any particular record. But what I did say was that don't show me everything. Just show me the columns that I requested. And here are the columns that we requested: distinguished name, object category, object class, common name. For example, Robert Stevens is a common name. Object class is a user. The category or the definition of this object is actually a person. And the full distinguished name is Robert Stevens. Here we go. Which is a user in the OU sales, which is in North Carolina, which is in BrendanBrady.com domain. So this way, you can limit exactly what kind of information from Active Directory you would like to see. So what I've done is the following. The very first file had all the columns and had all the rows. The second file has only a limited number of columns, basically the information that I would like to track. The next thing we're going to do is, what we're going to say is that just don't show me all the records, only show the records that I'm interested in. Okay, so let's see how to type that command. I'm going to close out of Excel one more time. Or actually, let's close the file only. No, I do not want to save any changes, because we're going to use Excel from time to time. So going back to our notes over here, we did the second example. Now in the third example, we're going to do the following. Let me explain to you what we're going to do here. CSVD -f to create a file called adinfo2. So this will be a new file. -l, that means show me the following columns. So up to this part, the command is the same except for the new file name. Now what I'm going to say -r, which is the rows. What I'm saying is limit me to the following rows, and over here in quotations and then in parentheses over here, you need to type the word object class is equal to user. In other words, what you're saying is that show me all the users of the BrendanBrady.com domain. That's how the syntax is written. So let's try out this command. I'm going to minimize this. And now let's go back to DC1. And let's minimize this as well, because we need to go to the command prompt. So let's go to the command prompt. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen here. Okay, so let's start again. What I'm going to do is use the up arrow, because this part of the information was the same. All I'm going to do is change the file name from adinfo1 to ADInfo2 simply because I do not want to replace my existing file. Okay, go to the end. So far what we have said is that export into a file in ADInfo2 the following columns, and now I need to indicate the following rows. So I'm going to type -r there, and then over here we're going to specify with the quotation, open a bracket over here, and then type object class equals user. And again, it's not visible, but let me just finish this and I'll show you in a moment. Okay, so I typed object class equals user, close the bracket, and then close the quotation as well. Okay, let's see if I can see that at the end over here. I'm going to click over here and see if I can follow this to the end. There we go. Okay, so object, this part was similar to before. Now we're saying is -r object class equals user, just like it was over here in this syntax. Okay, I'm going to click on the enter button, and again it successfully, now look at this, it exported 10 records only, not like before where it imported or exported the entire Active Directory. So let me minimize this and go back to our Excel spreadsheet, and this time open up the next file that we just created, ADInfo2, and there we go. See how neat the information becomes. So now you know exactly how to extract exactly what you want from the Active Directory and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, manipulate it, or perhaps even use it for reporting. So here we go. Here are the user accounts that were created. I know I created this myself. This was a user account created by the Ghost to use for its own console. Here's another user account. I always create a user account for myself as the administrator, just in case I get locked out. Here's the administrator account that exists, and these are some of the accounts that were created on our system. By the way, when you say object class is equal to user, it actually imports both users as well as computer accounts. So here are two computer accounts, and this was the computer account that was created when we performed the RISC lab, when after the imaging using the RISC process, client 1, which is actually called the administrator 1, joined the domain. So once again, you are looking at the Active Directory, but only certain records in the Active Directory. So let's summarize what we have done so far. We started by using the very simple csvde command, and that basically exported everything from the Active Directory. Then in the second command, I showed you how to limit to certain columns, and in the third command, I showed you how to limit to certain columns and to certain rows. So now you're looking exactly at the information that you would like to see. Here's another command that we'll try out. Again, the command will start the same as before, so export into ADInfo3, and then show me only the following columns. And now for -r for records, what we're doing is the following. Remember, we use this object class is equal to user, which is fine. What we are saying now is the following, that show me all the users and computers that start with the letter R. So it will show you all the records that have this entry. Basically what I'm doing is I'm showing you how to use wildcards. And the way you indicate that in code is by starting the quotation out here, and then starting with the parenthesis and putting the ampersand sign over here. And the ampersand basically is then operated for this bracket and as well as for this bracket, and then you close the two brackets. So a little tricky command. We'll just make sure that we type it accurately. So I'm going to minimize this, and let's give it a shot. So let's go back to DC1, and in there I'm going to close this file. We don't need it anymore. No, don't save any changes. And then let's go to the command prompt, and let's type this command. I'm going to start with the previous command once again and start modifying it. So let's change the name from ADInfo2 to ADInfo3. So let's do that. Delete. Here's a file. I want to see the following columns. Now in the rows, I need to make a slight change. So -r is fine. And then what happens is the following. I'm going to start with a bracket first. So let's start that. Okay, and then put the ampersand sign. So what you're saying is I would like to see this, and the object equal class user is over here, which is great. And then what I need to do is, let me just come to the end over here. Okay, so I would like to perform the AND operation on this and on this. So let's open up another one over here. And over here I'm going to type cn, which is common name, equals, and let's do a search for all computer names and user names that begin with R. And I'm going to put the asterisk over here. So this command basically says that show me all users and computers whose common name begins with an R. And now I'm going to close this bracket here, and then I have to close it one more time to close. See, this first one that I closed was for this particular one, and the last one that I closed was for the first bracket that I started. I think the command looks good. We'll find out in a moment. Let's hit the enter key and see if this review is successful. Actually, it found just one record and it exported it into that file. And you know why? We created one user called Robert Stevens, and that's exactly why I put R asterisk out there, so that I can find exactly the user that I want. So again, open the file, this time ADInfo3, and there we go. Okay, so basically what I've been trying to do is develop your skills into exporting Active Directory into an Excel spreadsheet, and once it is there, you can manipulate it, or you can find exactly what you want to export and then export it into the Active Directory. So this was the first set of commands in CSVDE, namely the export commands. Now let's close this. It is important that you know exactly how to export because it is useful, A, and B is once you know how to export, then you can try importing objects into the Active Directory also. Importing is a serious activity. You have to make sure that you know how to run these commands well before you can start importing objects into the Active Directory. And there are several examples that I'm going to do to show you how objects can be imported into Active Directory. So let's go on to the next screen over here, importing objects. Now by default, the CSVDE switch works in the export mode. To make it work in the import mode, what I have to do is type the command CSVDE and then immediately follow it by the -I switch, which basically means import. Now, before you start importing objects into the Active Directory, make sure you understand the CSVDE command very well. Make sure you understand how the text file works. Make sure you know how to create those text files in Excel before you start actually importing objects into the Active Directory, because Active Directory is a live database. It's an important database that is actually maintaining information about your domain. If for some reason you import into the Active Directory and those objects were corrupted or not well formatted for the Active Directory to understand, you'll have a huge problem sitting on your hands. Basically, your Active Directory might crash and it may just not be usable. So always perform a backup. In fact, you should meet the following prerequisites before you try the import. The first thing is you must always change your domain policy to allow blank passwords. Once you have imported the records, you can reset the policy to whatever you want. Now let's discuss this a little bit in detail. By default in Windows 2000, your domain policy is set to allow users to be created using blank passwords. In Server 2003, that's not the case. They've tried to increase the security in Server 2003, and over there it's not the case. But again, this is just the default. After you create a new domain, I'm sure one of the things that you will definitely do is set a password policy, such as minimum password length of 5 or 7, and the password has to expire after so many days and so forth. So to begin with, you must make sure that before you do the import process that your policy is set to blank passwords. This is just to get the objects imported, which does not take too long. Once the objects are imported, then you can reset it to whatever policy you want. So let's verify that. I'm going to minimize this, and we're going to go to our DC1 and then run Active Directory users and computers. And then to go to the domain policy, you click on your domain name, right click, properties, group policy. All this was covered in Lab 14. So if you're not sure about the details of these activities, please refer to Lab 14, and I've shown in detail exactly what is contained in this and how you can make changes to it. But by default, I'm going to take you to the computer configuration out here under security settings, local policies, and under account policies, and then here's a password policy. So minimum password length is 0, which is exactly what we need. If it is not the case, then you would double click over here, make sure to set to 0 before you start importing anything into Active Directory. So I've done that. Let's close this, cancel this out, and I'm going to close this as well. Okay, so that was one of the prerequisites. The second prerequisite, and perhaps an important one, is always back up the Active Directory before you try something like this. Okay, before you import anything, please back up the Active Directory. I've showed you how to back up the Active Directory in a previous video. Now, having done that, you also got to be familiar with the LDAP attributes. The LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, and you have to make sure how these are formatted. In other words, I just cannot take a simple Excel file like I did over here and name these columns any way I want. These columns have to be named in a specific manner, and I will show you what that format is. In fact, I've already created a file just to make it easier for you. That file is included as part of your CD. Then what you can do is open up that file and then use it to actually import objects into Active Directory into your domain. So what you have to do is learn about how Active Directory names the columns, and I'm going to show you exactly how that is done also. So let's do that next. What we're going to do is learn this, use this tool called the ADSI editor, also known as the Active Directory Services Interface Editor. What this editor does is it gives you an idea as to what kind of information is kept in the Active Directory and the format in which it is kept. This tool is not installed by default. On the server CD, there is a support folder, and in there is a setup file. Once you run the setup file, this interface is installed for you. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is minimize this and take you back to Domain Controller 1. And my CD is already inserted, so I'm going to open up this CD-ROM. This is the Server 2000 CD that you're looking at. And in the support folder, there is a folder called Tools, and in there's a setup file. I've already run the setup file. This setup file is going to actually install the Active Directory support tools, namely the files in this particular folder called support, and the one that I'm interested in is the ADSI editor. So I've done that already. Once you've done that, what you do is you create a new Microsoft Management Console by clicking on Start Run, and then over here I'm going to type MMC. And again, I'm sure you're familiar with this. I'm going to add a new console, or rather a new snap-in, and this snap-in is the Active Directory Services Editor snap-in. So I'm going to click on the Add button, close it. So I've created my custom tool, namely the ADSI editor. Now I'm going to expand this tool, and now select it. Now to use this tool, first I have to connect to the domain controller itself. So I'm going to right click on it and say connect to, and then over here under name, I'll type my domain's name, which is benandbrady.com. And then by default it says just find a domain that is the default for this one or the server that you logged on to. So in our case it should be okay, and it will find it. Yep, there we go. It connected me to DC1 of benandbrady.com because the Active Directory is actually stored over here. I could have connected to DC2 as well. So I'm going to expand this, and this is showing our domain, which is benandbrady.com. Expand this. By the way, if you had several domains, you can manage all those domains in the central tool known as the ADSI editor. Now here we go. Here is a bunch of users and groups that we've created. So let's go to OU North Carolina and then go to sales, and then here's the object that we created, Robert Stevens. I'm going to right click on this, go to properties, just to show you the different attributes. There are several attributes, and you saw that very clearly. These attributes were the columns in the export file that you saw when we exported everything from the Active Directory. Now here's the switch, and I'm going to use this and ask it to show me only the mandatory attributes. These are the minimum items that must be available in my text file for me to be able to import this object into the Active Directory. So let's check it out. I'm going to click on mandatory over here, and over here it says select a property to view, and these are the different mandatory attributes, namely CN, instance type, object category, class, and so forth. For example, if I click on class, it should show me that the value is user, it is also a person, and so forth. Okay, so this gives you a good idea as to what attributes are necessary, and also the formatting of those attributes. Check this out. It is object with a lower case O and C with a capital C. Let's look at something else. Here, look at this, the way it is done over here. Sam account name, and I showed you this before, lowercase s, and then capital A, capital M, capital A, and then so forth. Okay, so when you create your when you create your import file, your file should follow the same rules. So I'm going to close this, and I'll give you some more ideas to what these attributes are. Let's close this tool as well. No, I don't want to save anything because I will not be reusing that, and take you back to my notes over here. Here's an this graphic gives you some information as to what is included as part of the Active Directory. For example, your type of user is referred to as the object class. The path is the path for the distinguished name, this one. Okay, the display name is a combination of the first name and the last name, and that's what the full name is. Even though the label over here appears as full name, it is actually labeled as display name in the Active Directory. The user principal name or the UPN name is the name with the with the suffix of benandbrady.com attached to it, and so forth. For example, last name, here's a label, but in the Active Directory it is defined as SN or surname. Okay, so this gives you some idea as to what to do with this particular file. So let me show you the file that I've created, and then we will use the commands to actually log in and create, or rather import, these objects into Active Directory. So let me first open up the file that I've created. I'm going to use Excel, and this is the file that is included in your CD-ROM. The file is called import1.csv. It's an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to click on the open button over here and check this file out. The first column is the DN, which is a distinguished name. Second column is the SAM account name. Here's the user principal name, and I selected some of the optional values such as telephone number, department, object class, user, and so forth. So let's see what this is going to do. What this is going to do is create the following users for me. How many users? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first user is Andrew Sheeman, the next one is James Taylor, and the last one is going to be Carl Lopez. These users will be located in the container called users. If you remember, the users OU, the default OU, is not called an organizational unit. It's actually called a container. Hence, you have to call it CN, not OU. And this container is in, let me expand this, benandbrady.com domain. Okay, so that gives you an idea. This will be our logon name, A. Sheeman, J. Taylor, and so forth. And the user principal name will be, let me just reposition this column and show you, A. Sheeman at benandbrady.com. It's going to add it for us automatically. And here's the telephone numbers and so forth. Okay, I've also added a field for department. So let me just show you that as well. Here's a department field, and I'm saying that this is the type of object class called user. Okay, so let's use this file, and we're going to import the following users from Excel into Active Directory. And then later on, I'm going to show you how to create these Excel files very quickly if you already have names into your database. So I'm going to close this. No, don't save any changes. I would like to keep it the way it is in the original format. And now take you back to my notes to show you how to perform the import operation, which is actually a very simple command. So let's go back over here. And to import, what you need to do is run the command csvde with the -I. This will switch the csvde command into the import mode, and then you have to specify the file name, which is import1.csv. That's the name of the file that I'm using. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to minimize the screen over here, and then go to the command prompt. Let's clear the screen. Now let's type the command. So the command again is csvde -I to import. Okay, now what I'm going to specify is the file from which to import from, so -f, and then the name of the file, which is import1.csv. Alrighty, I think the syntax looks good, so let's hit it. I'm going to hit the enter key, and here we go. 5 entries modified successfully. This command has run. Let's verify that into our domain. So I'm going to go to Active Directory users and computers. And let's go to the container users, and over there we go. We found our new users, Andrew Sheeman, James Taylor, and so forth. Did you also notice by default these accounts are disabled, which is a good thing, so that after you've imported it, users cannot simply log on until you actually go to the user accounts and then actually enable them by clicking on this checkbox. So I just enabled the account for James Taylor. Let me also show you. Here's the general. Here's a telephone number that it put in for us. I'm going to click on the OK button over here, and James Taylor account has been imported, and then I've activated it. So as a precautionary measure, it keeps the accounts disabled, so that once you've successfully imported these accounts, then you have to go ahead and then enable them so that the users can actually log in and use the resources on your network. Now what I'm going to do is the following. This may sound a lot of work, because after all, I've created these files, and now it becomes your responsibility to type those names in those files. So let me show you how to create these files quickly. All I'm trying to do is share some Excel tips with you. I'm going to hide these columns. Okay, and let me show you how quickly you can create some of these things. For example, let's say that in our domain, our display name is a combination of first name and last name. You already typed in the first name, you already typed in the last name. you do not have to retype this information again. That's exactly where Excel comes in handy. So what I'm going to say over here is the word display name. That's my next column. Now, what I'm going to do is use a formula. The formula starts with the equal to sign, and simply use my arrow keys to go to this cell, which is the cell A2, and then put the ampersand sign over here. That means this is going to combine it with, and what I need to do is the following. Let me first make a mistake to show you how to do this accurately, and I would like to combine A2 with B2. So here's the column, or rather the cell address A2, here's the cell address B2, and I'm going to hit the enter button. Now look at this, it has combined the name. However, what I also want is the space in between the first name and the last name, and I'll show you how to modify that. What you do is you go over here, and then after the ampersand you put open quotation and put a space after that, and then close the quotation. So what it's going to do is insert a blank character in between the first name and the last name, and then put the ampersand sign over here one more time. Now notice the difference. Now I'm going to hit enter, and here we go. We have the first name and the last name along with the space in between. So that's one quick way of actually creating your display names to import objects into Active Directory. The other thing that you may want to consider also is the fact that typically, especially in my network, that the way I did it, the logon name was a combination of the first name and the last name. So let's make a new column over here. And I'm sure some of you know many more tricks than the one that I'm showing, but I just want to share you with some of these little switches or some of these formulas that will help you create these users very quickly into your domain. So here we go, the logon name, and now what I need to do is the following. I'm going to start with the equal to sign. That means I'm starting a formula, and a logon name is a combination of the first and the last name, but not the full first name. It is a combination of the first letter of the first name and the full last name. So it should be O Chhatriwala. So in order to do that, what I have to do is use a function known as the left function. So I'm going to type the word over here, left, and then open the parenthesis. Now it's going to guide me that, okay, tell me from which text would you like to extract a character. And what I'm going to say is that the text is actually located right over here. Now I'm going to put a comma, and now it wants to know, tell me the number of characters you would like to extract. I would just like to extract the first character from the left hand side of this word obeyed, and I'm going to close this. Okay, so that's going to extract the letter O for me. Now what I want to do is extract that and then combine it with Chhatriwala. So I'm going to click on the ampersand sign over here, and then select this row B2, or rather the cell B2, and then hit the enter key. What this will do is make a new name with a combination of O Chhatriwala for me. Now how does this work? Once you've set up the formula, all you do is enter the first names and last names of users. For example, Dennis Jones. Alright, let's put one more name over here. Mark, Anthony, and let's include somebody else over here as well. Julie Fernandez. Alrighty. So having done that, all you do is select these two because the formulas are over here. I'm going to select these two and then drag these cells down. Basically what I'm doing is copying the formulas. Since these formulas are relative, automatically the names, the display names and the logon names will be developed for me. Isn't that neat? So once you have some basic information about users, you can very quickly create all these, then create a text file by saving it as file, save as. Make sure you save it with a comma separated value format. And once that is done, your import file is ready. Just take care that you use not the first name, last name the way I've shown you over here, but exactly the characters that I have given you in the import file. So let me show you what that file looks like. Going back to the domain controller, here was the file import1.csv. I'm going to open this up with Excel, and here we go. Make sure that you use the column headings exactly the way it is described over here, but you can use a combination of this to actually create these names very quickly. So I did exactly that. I had a longer spreadsheet over here. I extracted exactly what I wanted and then saved this file with a comma separated value. So I'm going to close this file now and then go back to our notes. So I think we are done with our, that was the last sheet of my notes here. We are done with this lab. In this particular lab, I showed you how to import and export Active Directory objects. We use a command called the CSVDE command. To begin with, we use that command in the export mode, where you were able to export the entire Active Directory into a comma separated value, and you could then open up that file using Excel or any other spreadsheet program or any other application that can actually read the CSV format. Once we did that, then I also showed you how to limit certain information from the Active Directory by restricting the number of columns and the number of rows. I also showed you how to search the Active Directory. We actually performed a search for a user or a computer whose name begins with the letter R. And then finally, I showed you how to import objects into the Active Directory. But before we did that, we actually used the ADSI editor to understand what some of these attributes are. Then I've given you a file that is already pre-created for you. Simply type in additional users in that file and feel free to use it to import objects into the Active Directory. That should also conclude this video on Active Directory. I thank you very much for watching this video. I hope to see you in other videos from Train Signal.